Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing Faces of Death, the new remake of the, I guess, classic 1980s movie, the sort of haunted videotape that you would get at the video store. It was sort of a seemingly a coming-of-age sort of ritual for young horror fans and gore hounds of that era. That was something that I never was growing up in that era, so I never really tracked this movie down. It always kind of seemed like a pretty boring and pointless movie. I'm not like a huge fan of those Mondo type movies. They typically are pretty boring, and the gore has been topped so many times with so many better movies in the modern era. So really, those aren't really movies that I watch that often. And I think that this one did catch my interest though because it is a very modern take on that material, and it's trying to do it from the perspective of social media and snuff films on the rise. And I really thought that was interesting, an interesting angle, and there was a lot of positive press coming out about this movie that sort of piqued my interest. And so I went and saw it last night, and I have lots of thoughts that I want to get into. So without much further ado, let's talk about it. Let's review The Faces of Death. As if the film needed any more of a sort of promotional juice, you really had a disturbing video that was shared on Truth Social by the president on the day of the opening day of the release for this movie, in which it showed a real actual murder. And I think that sort of snuff imagery or snuff-like movies, those sort of viral videos that show extreme violence, are something that has really taken over social media in the past decade or so. And it's been sort of a slow trickle. We had things like the Zapruder family home video of the JFK assassination, which was sort of hidden away from the public for so long, and then eventually it did become public. Then you had things like 9/11 being shown on live television, and it's just sort of slowly sort of creeped more and more into the mainstream, where now you go on social media and you can doom scroll for hours seeing all sorts of violent videos, and you see people's last moments and the most sort of violent and gruesome ways that they can meet those final moments. And it's really disturbing. I was raised in an era where Live Leaks was very popular, and I remember kids in my high school coming up to me and showing me random torture and like sort of extreme violence videos completely unprompted, and it's like, what the hell is going on? But this was something that was shared around a lot by a lot of people, and there was definitely a draw to it, but it's also having a disturbing effect, I would say, on our own desensitization with this type of violence. Every single day, it's like you can constantly see these sort of murders. I mean, we saw with the Charlie Kirk murder how that video was spread around like wildfire, and there was all sorts of like memes and all sorts of things that have come out of that. And I think that there's a lot of things that Faces of Death is speaking to in a modern context, and I think this really does feel like an appropriate way to modernize the concept. It's taking a film that was basically not even really a coherent narrative film, right? And it's turning it into one that has more of a coherent narrative structure. And I think that, in my opinion, there was a really good setup to this movie. You follow Barbie Ferreira playing this young woman who is dealing with the trauma of the aftermath of her sister's death, which also was in a viral, violent sort of video that was leaked, I guess, by the police. It was something that she feels partially responsible for and guilty for, the death of her own sister. And I think that allows there to be an in to the narrative, to have sort of both thematic depth from a sort of social commentary way, but also from just a pure emotional way. Horror movies always have to work first as a horror movie and as a story and as a story structure and have a compelling narrative, and then you want to have those sort of social commentary aspects. And I think that is what makes this movie have a really compelling hook that sort of engages the audience as we begin with the narrative. That being said, though, it slowly starts to unravel. We do get some really gruesome kills and some great deaths, and I think the performance of Dacre Montgomery, his performance as the killer, was really compelling. And I think that there was a comparison I saw in some reviewers that said that it kind of reminded them of The House That Jack Built, and I absolutely agree with that. That's not really a movie I loved either, and so maybe that's part of the reason why I sort of struggled with this movie. But I think ultimately, while you had a really interesting concept, this woman that is dealing with this trauma, and now she's trying to sort of channel it in a way that can be productive towards society by working in content moderation for a social media company that's essentially TikTok. She slowly unravels this conspiracy on the app, which features a Faces of Death remake being done in a DIY horror movie sort of student film approach, where a serial killer is actually killing people for real but making it look like it's just sort of an artistic project. And I think that's a really great way to both incorporate the sort of social commentary thematic elements that the filmmakers are trying to do here, as well as the sort of emotional depth that they're trying to bring as well. They're trying to get us to care about this character, Margot, who really is not being heard by anybody just because of the trauma that she has, and everyone else is so desensitized and trying to profit off of this violence, while as she knows the real ramifications and the real sort of depth of, hey, this is a human being. Yes, it's a video that you'll probably just look at and laugh, or you'll be shocked by, and there'll be some sort of dopamine hit in your brain or whatever, but these are actually real people, and it's really disgusting that it's getting spread around as much, and it's having negative effects on the brains of the people that watch these videos constantly. So I think that's a really interesting way of approaching this narrative. Unfortunately, like I said, I don't think it leads to anything that interesting. I think the film loses steam as we get into the second half of the narrative, and especially when we get to the third act. I really just think it led to something that was very generic, boring, and just it just felt so repetitive, and so like you're just taking from all these other movies. Oh my gosh, it's a woman beating on something and blood is splashing all over her face. How many times have we seen that exact way of ending a horror movie? I swear I've seen it like 100 million times, and it was just like, what the hell are we doing here? Why do we need to once again show a woman's face being splattered with blood as she screams out with like a primal scream as she's beating to death her tormentor? I appreciated seeing this image maybe the first 10 to 15 times, but at this point it's really getting repetitive and dull. You can find more interesting ways to cap off your cat and mouse thriller game that you were doing in the second half of this narrative, but you just didn't find a compelling way to do that, and you just kind of reached for the generic cliches that we've seen over and over again. And I don't mind if you want to flip it and say that she wins at the end, that's great, but do it in a different way than what we've seen a million times before. Make it more fitting than what we saw. I just think it didn't feel fitting to the narrative or to this sort of great concept that was set up. I think we could have had a much more satisfying ending. Now, that being said, I did still enjoy this movie. I think there were some really gruesome kills. I think that the direction was smart. It really felt like a hip and clever modern horror movie that really is exploring this era of doom scrolling and constant sort of snuff films on the rise. It really felt like it had something to say, and it really felt like a smart way of approaching this modern remake that's, like I said, taking a movie that's basically barely even a coherent film at all and turning it into something personal, different, and thematically rich. And they really were able to explore the idea without simply just going through the paces of a remake of what you would expect for Faces of Death. That being said, I do think that the cliches that they kind of tried to drag into the end, and the fact that they kind of didn't really know how to satisfyingly end it, really does undermine a lot of the great concept that was at work here. Now, I don't want to completely bash this movie because I do think it's pretty good, but I just am disappointed because I think it could have been even better. Now, this was a film that was made by Isa Mazet and Daniel Goldhaber. The two of them, I haven't really seen a lot of their other work, but I do think that they have some potential, and they did a really good job at setting up the concept here and making it a personal and deep and interesting movie in a lot of ways. And it's definitely a film I'm going to want to rewatch. Now, that being said, I think there's just too many disappointments at the end that I can't give a sort of huge endorsement of this movie. But if you're intrigued by the concept, if you also have a morbid curiosity in this sort of subject matter, then I would probably recommend the movie for you. But don't expect this to necessarily be like the next modern masterpiece of horror, though it is a pretty solid horror movie. So that's all I have to say for Faces of Death. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you've seen, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications every time I make a new video. So again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.